Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Was going to start today off with some Trump ramblings. Evidently, the former president not happy with the 35 Republicans who voted for the January 6th commission. The wayward, I loved it, wayward Republicans who just can't help themselves. He went on to say that we have much better policy and are much better for the country, but Democrats stick together. Republicans don't. And I'm going, again, I know they live in the world of alternative fact. I know they have an alternative reality. I know they've been suffering from foxitis for so long, but geez, man. When you're making stuff, I guess this is what he's been really masterful at. He can just make stuff up on the scene, reach around to the dark side of the moon and pop out a nugget or two every now and again. And this one being that Democrats stick together and Republicans don't. He went on to say that they don't have Romneys or Little Ben Sasses or Cheneys of the world. Unfortunately, we do. Sometimes there are consequences to being ineffective and weak. And you're right. When you have bad policies, when you have no vision, look, he was president for 4 years, didn't have a health care plan, didn't have an infrastructure plan, claimed had all these wonderful plans. They were in the secret vault. That would have been the secret vault at Staples, in the paper aisle. In the unopened reams of paper, that's where the plans were. Blank pages. But I was going to start there, and I decided, no, already too much time on him. Too much time on people like Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, the senator there, who, again, pushing this narrative of, that what happened on January 6th was really it was a peaceful protest. Calling it an insurrection, it wasn't. No, by and large, peaceful. Yeah, it was peaceful. I guess ask those 150 cops, especially the one with the smashed vertebrae, ask him how peaceful it was. But again, they're sticking to their narratives, and it's all they've got. Understand, they need to keep the base angry and drunk with fantasy. Because I flipped on right-wing talk radio today for a couple of minutes, and all I heard was it was peaceful. There were no rioters. The media, it's the media that is making all this up. And then, on a dime, flipping over to the, it's lazy people. They're getting this unemployment. They're not working, and you should be angry at them. I love the frame of there's a labor shortage. And it's Joe Biden's fault. I love that. Now, understand, February 2020, before the economy went, during the last guy's watch, the economy was not great. Now, there are people who are going, oh, no, the economy was fantastic for the investor class. But for average workers, they were just staying on the treadmill. So these folks who aren't going back to these crummy jobs, aren't going back to the economy of February 2020, I don't blame them. And that question keeps coming up. Do we want to go back to that economy? Do we want to go back to what it was like January of 2020, February of 2020? Or has this crisis, has this moment given us a pause, given us an opportunity to kind of go, we're going to hit the reset button. And we're going to undo the horrible of 40 years of supply-side voodoo Reaganomics. We're going to undo the years of neoliberalism, and we're going to go in a different direction. And look, the Republican Party is scared to death of what this new world looks like when workers have choices. You know, when you kept taking away their ability to say no, when you kept taking away their ability to go on strike, when you kept taking the ability to organize into unions and go and fight for better wages, hours, and conditions, you made them desperate. And this is a moment where people are taking stock of what we've just gone through. It's like any life-threatening crisis, you come out of it on the other side thinking a little bit differently. Which is why when I heard CNBC come up with a new term of woke capitalism, which I love, by the way. I gotta tell you, I love that. I love the frame. And I'm hoping that some people do get woke to what's going on with our capitalist system. Because what we're seeing right before us is, pre-pandemic Republican response to workers having power. And that's passing laws and making legislation to force them into crummy wage jobs, to force them into, lack of opportunity positions, just survival positions. And of course, at the bottom wage. So, when I looked at this, I'm going, the Trump stuff aside, I'm tired of him. Old hat. I'm tired of the narrative of there was nothing going on January 6th. I think the big story right now is that finally there's something that we start to agree upon. There's something that even the most, dyed-in-the-wool, red-hatted, red dye number 7456 that's bleeding into the brain of these folks with foxitis, even they agree having mass concentrations of wealth is not good for an economy. Having poverty wages for low-wage workers, not good for an economy. And they're getting woke to the reality that capitalism is not working for a good bunch of people. And I think that's a good thing. And as I said, what we're seeing from the Republicans is exactly what you would expect. Cracking the whip, get back to work. As I was sitting today, I was thinking about a lot of this stuff. I think back to my grandfather and the stories that he told me. And he talked about what it was like in the 50s and 60s to be a worker in this country when we really had power, when there was really power for working people. He told the story of one day, and it cracked me up at the time. He actually quit 3 jobs in one day. It was one of those stories where he was starting a job. He went in the morning, and within like 15 minutes, the boss had ticked him off, and he's like, I don't need this. I'm out of here. And he literally walked across the street and, filled out an application. The guy put him to work that minute. And within like an hour, he was like, nope, this isn't for me. I walked out the door and then walked down the street and took another job doing the same kind of work. And, by the end of the day, he goes, nope, this isn't for me. And then the next day found another job that he spent 20 some years at. Because he said, look, I had the opportunity to work for people who were going to treat me right. Not treat me like some animal who's just there to make them profit, but to treat us right. And that's what the union was for him. And I'm looking at this moment and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about, the options that I remember him talking about and having the ability to go, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm moving on. Having that freedom of choice. I love when people talk about the free market. Oh, you've got the free market. That's the free market. He was free to move from one job to another. And here's the great part of it. They paid the same wages, same kind of benefits. And in the case, they were all under the same kind of contract. We haven't had that in this country in a very long time. That's true worker power. And it got me thinking again about, the question that keeps coming up. What good is it to have an economy if we're not creating good jobs? What are our expectations for the workplace? Do we live to work or work to live? I think about an old Romanian guy who said, he came to the United States because he wanted to He wanted to work to live. He wanted the wages that he made to be able to support a lifestyle, that he could spend time with his family, that he could nurture and grow his family. And that was his focus. Whereas he said in Romania, all you do is work. That's your life. That's your life's goal. And you talk to a lot of people in this country who are working 2-3 jobs just to stay up on the hamster wheel. And we're kind of in that moment. So for me, that's kind of where we are. So in this moment, is the goal just full employment of people with, everybody's got a job, granted, half of them are really bad, or is the goal to have good employment, to have people with options who are going to be able to make not just a survival wage, but something that's going to make them be able to live? I keep coming back to this, because there's now been a number of stories here recently, and the AP just put one out the other day, that many of the workers that are off now aren't going back to the old industries they were in, and it's really the restaurant industry, it's really the hospitality industry, who these folks have been treated like piles of dog what for ages. The women especially the women in these industries, who are like, you know what? One, I can't find childcare because the schools aren't open. Two, I'm not going back to the kind of harassment, the kind of, sexual harassment, the stories that you hear from these servers. Oh, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I give you a tip. I mean, that kind of nonsense. And from the stories that are being told, it's ramping up. It's getting worse. Because as we're opening up, and look, I cannot imagine. I am not a hospitality type worker. I am never going to be a customer salesperson. I'm not going to be the bright, smiley, happy person behind the counter dealing with your problems. I'm just not. I'm never going to be there for you to scream at and soundboard off of. That's not my personality. And I give credit to people who are able to absorb the abuse that we, as entitled Americans, heap on working people every day. There isn't enough money to make me stand behind a counter and have Karen scream at me for an hour over some nonsensical, ridiculous thing that she doesn't even understand. But we have people who do that. And they sadly have to do it for poverty wages. Why? Because they're in desperate, dire straits. We've never done well with single mothers. We've never done well with low-wage working families. We've always used them as punching bags and always used them as you don't want to be like that. There's a great cartoon that went around not too long ago. And, for every parent who's ever said, you don't want to be like the garbage man or the street sweeper, it said, the next line was, the kid going, but mommy, the street sweeper's got health care. He's got a union that gets him retirement security and he makes a good wage. What's wrong with that job? And the reality is what is wrong with that job? Nothing. We used to, and I go back to my grandfather's era, we used to have respect for work. No matter what you did, no matter what level of the job ladder you were on, there was respect. There was respect of a decent wage. You could actually eke out, you could make an existence, and a pretty decent one. I think of my grandparents. They started out homeless. They started out, grandma got pregnant, and as they did back in that era, threw them out. You're on your own. So much for family values. And they, through their life and through their work, led a very solidly American middle-class existence and died in their homes, with their pension money that they got from their jobs, with their Social Security money, and a little bit of savings that they had squirreled away. They lived the American dream. And I think this pandemic has had people looking back and going, hey, that's not our future. Our future is desperation. Our future is gig economy nonsense. Our future is begging for pennies and being grateful for scraps instead of saying, How do we make a better existence, not just for ourselves, but for our kids? For me, this is a moment. And I've been saying this for a while. This isn't new this isn't me being Johnny come lately. I've been saying this for a while. This crisis could be that reset moment that brings us back to people saying enough is enough already. And, Joe Biden giving an extra $300 is helping a little bit, but it's not keeping people out of the workforce like we're being spun. Because understand, listen to what I'm telling you. The Republicans were never going to be in favor of anything he's ever done or will ever do. They were going to be against this from the beginning because he was doing it. They were all on board, when Trump gave $600. But Biden saying, no, we're gonna continue this for a little bit longer to help people get through this transition and give them options and choices, which is what unemployment is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you a little bit of breathing room to make the right choice for your path. You're not taking crummy jobs that you're gonna leave in a couple of weeks anyway, because employers shouldn't want that either. You want good fit. You want a good match. You want people who are going to stay and help you, not people who are just desperate. Oh, I just need the money. When I find a nickel more, I'm going. That's not good for an economy either. But all of this labor shortage talk, all of this, we can't find anybody, this is a construct. This is a Republican talking point. And if there truly were, and I'm seeing it, if there truly are people having a hard time finding employees, you know what you do? You can say it. You sweeten the pot a little bit. You raise the wages. You make the conditions better. Better benefits. Better life-work balance. Better opportunities. Better treatment. What's interesting, in all my years of doing organizing and being in the union, the number one reason most people organize, respect. You would think it was about wages or health care. It's about how people are treated. And I think in this moment, people have said enough. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're in an industry where you're going, you know what, I'm not going back. Love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day unemployed workers began a sit-down strike at the post office in Vancouver, British Columbia. They had been organized by the communist-led Relief Project Workers Union during the Great Depression. In Canada, federally funded works projects had been administered at the provincial level. By late 1937, the Prime Minister began to cut funding. Unable to financially sustain the projects alone, Provincial Premier Thomas Patillo ended the works project for British Columbia. Masses of unemployed men thrown off their jobs, some driven to homelessness, organized occupations of the Hotel Georgia, the Vancouver Art Gallery, and the Maine Post Office to protest the cuts. While hotel owners paid protesters to leave, the occupation at the gallery and the post office lasted for weeks. Finally, on Father's Day, June 18th, gallery occupiers were driven out with tear gas. The post office strikers were met with much more violence. Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the assault with tear gas and forcibly dragging of sit-downers out of the building. Once evicted, they were met with the batons of local police. Organizers were singled out for especially severe beatings, and scores were hospitalized for their injuries. One striker, Arthur Redseth, had an eye knocked out, while his fellow sit-downer had his jaw broken for asking authorities to call an ambulance for his friend. Strike leader Steve Brody suffered permanent eye damage as well. News of the terror spread throughout the city, and by mid-afternoon, 10 to 15,000 protesters gathered to express outrage at what became known as Bloody Sunday in Vancouver. Premier Patello denounced the strikers as having received too much sympathy. He nonetheless used the debacle as an opportunity to get federal funds reinstated. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this is one of those moments where I would play that, what was that Rockwell song back during the 80s? Somebody's watching you. Turns out somebody who's watching us is the Postal Service. Did you know that they've got like a law enforcement arm? And I knew they did. Like if someone stole your mail, they would track it down and you could file a claim with them and all that stuff. But evidently they're heavy into this AI facial recognition stuff. They're into a whole bunch of, what you would think is top level NSA kind of stuff. But I saw this story where they're talking about the Internet Covert Operations Program that tracks social media posts, and it's got this clear view facial recognition stuff that's got like billions of images in it. It's scary stuff. The kind of stuff, again, that I thought the NSA was doing, but no, it's our friendly neighborhood postal service. And here to share some thoughts on, well, if this is a bad thing. I've asked David Carrol to come talk with us. He's associate professor at the Parsons School of Design. He is, in my view, the expert on this stuff, especially in protecting your data. So heads up. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, it's great to be on, Rick. Thanks for bringing this up. Yeah, it is a strange story to have discovered that the Postal Service, is not necessarily digging through everyone's mail, but is potentially analyzing everyone's social media.
Why are they into our social media? Look, I get checking my junk mail. I get that. I get, checking for anthrax in the postal stuff. I get the mail. But what I put on social media, why them?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, it's been sort of recently discovered, especially with all the shenanigans related to the Postal Service recently, that the Postal Service has a law enforcement arm, and so the law enforcement arm is using a tool called Clearview AI, and many law enforcement agencies around the country at many levels of government have been using this tool, and the use of the tool is bringing up really significant privacy concerns, really some of the most fundamental ones. It's a company that is invested in by Peter Thiel, who does invest in a lot of companies that are providing data services to government agencies. And Clearview AI has been used by police departments and federal agencies. And what it basically allows you to do is find people in social media very easily. And the company touts that it has been used to find child predators because it can find just people who would normally be trying to hide their activity just out in the open.
Yeah, I mean, again, you think about you think about the fact that the Department of Homeland Security, they do this stuff. You think the NSA does this stuff. But I keep coming back to, why is the Postal Service doing this stuff? Who gave them the authority? Where did this come from? Is this a DeJoy thing? Was this a Trump thing? Because I just have 1,000 questions on this.
And these are really legitimate questions. And the same questions should be asked to almost all of the agencies that are using this software. And is this software something that we're going to accept in our country? Because if this software is allowed to continue to exist and be used at all levels of government, it erases a boundary between social media and law enforcement that we think needs to be there. It's sort of why the the Snowden revelations were so shocking to us because we thought there was some boundaries between the levels of surveillance. And when we are confronted with evidence that there are no boundaries, that's where we have this strong reaction to it. And we should, because it is revealing, inconvenient truths.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I'll be honest, I never thought there were there was no anonymity online. I always believed the NSA or someone could flip on my phone and listen wherever I've got it. And they say, no, we can't do that. They can do it. Technology, we've given technology so much preference that, we've basically gone, yeah, go ahead, take it. Because you've heard it, David, if you're not doing anything wrong, why do you worry?
Well, it's interesting that we believe that the technology can do these magic things when there is actually no independent verification that Clearview does what it claims to do with the accuracy that it claims to have. And it may be misidentifying people, and it may not work as well as it needs to work to be used in situations where it's being, considered for legal cases or law enforcement or prosecution. So the fact that the tool is kind of used so casually with no oversight or even assurance that it even does what it claims is an aspect of why it's so dangerous, perhaps.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you on that. But again, we've gone to this place because, 9/11 happened, January 6th happened. Now, January 6th, you had all those people who were very happy, to post their treason on social media. They basically reported their crimes and basically turned themselves in. And, I'm not surprised that we get the level of surveillance from this. I just keep coming back to why the Postal Service. How did they get, and I don't know, I know you don't know the answer to this, but how is it that someone chose the Postal Service to be the one that does this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Of all the agencies, especially when we don't clearly, appreciate or understand its law enforcement mechanism, it just rubs us the wrong way because of the Postal Service's primary role. But I think the take home is that, almost everyone in law enforcement is playing with this new toy.
Right.
And we don't know the implications of what's going to happen when this gets adopted without any sort of oversight. Yeah. And becomes the new norm. I think that's why we should be asking these questions.
No, I'm right there with you.
Not just for the post office.
Absolutely. And you see these stories coming out of China. There was just one last week talking about how basically Apple has sold their soul, and all of the things that they can do with these phones and all the tracking and all the data they can collect, they're doing for the Chinese Communist government. And you go, but we're not doing it over here or for anyone else. And you go, I don't know I buy any of that.
Well, it's interesting that what is occurring right now is some people call the splinter net, the idea that the internet is fracturing into regions because of different international models and attitudes and political situations. So the Chinese internet is the first and most obvious example of things splintering off, but other countries like Russia are trying to splinter off in more meaningful ways. We saw ways that in India the internet has been shut down and the social media services are obeying government orders to silence critics. And then of course in Europe, because of the GDPR, Europe has much stronger privacy and data protection rights than the United States, for example. So there's even variation across the Atlantic. And all these variations are causing more problems and dynamics in technology that make the situation that you bring up interesting. That Apple can be a contradiction. It can be, in the United States and Europe and other places, a force to protect privacy against companies like Facebook and Google and many others. But in China, it has to abide by the Communist Party's rules about data and store data in China and grant it access to that data. And so that's where our data lives and where our data goes is a very important thing, because it can go to places where you have less rights, and it can go to places where you have more rights.
Right.
And the average person now, is unfortunately trying to make sense of this new splinter net.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm looking at the Postal Service, which is quasi-private, quasi-public. It's, because the government's not supposed to be holding our data, but there are private corporations that do this, so we can just buy it from them whenever we want. Someone's collecting this, and it's always for a price. So how do we protect ourselves is where I keep coming back to. The Postal Service is at my house every day. How do I protect myself from them monitoring me, surveilling me, collecting my data, or any other entity?
I think there are interesting legal discussions at play in state houses, and even more recently in Washington, D.C. I saw a headline today that there is potentially some bipartisan agreements in the Senate for a national privacy bill. So these are all important developments. Virginia just passed a state privacy bill that was largely written by the industry, meaning the tech industry. So lots of interesting things are happening in this country around this topic. And I think during the Biden era is probably when something big is going to happen, if it happens, with regard to a national set of data rights. It would get us closer to what Europe has, and would certainly protect us from situations that people in China and Russia and other places find themselves in. So we do need these fundamental protections in the 21st century. And the anxiety around privacy is a reason why it's time to resolve these problems and to give people the basic rights they need to protect themselves. We really don't even have some of the basic tools yet.
Right.
So that's why we need to start at the basics.
But here's the thing: I talk to people who are considerably younger than I am, the millennials and younger, and they've been raised on this idea that there isn't any privacy. They've gone to schools where they've been monitored on video. They're used to being recorded at every opportunity. So this idea, this concept of privacy, isn't as strong as with someone my age and older. Where we grew up believing that there was still some illusion of privacy, that the government couldn't come in and go through your papers, but everything in people's lives are on these damn phones, and you can't get on a plane sometimes when you leave the country without giving them access to it. How do you see intergenerationally this working? And because I know kids who go, I don't care about privacy.
I think it's really contextual kind of issue. Privacy really exists on a continuum. If you think about, your house, there's a big difference between, somebody ringing the doorbell versus inviting someone in versus letting someone rifle through your bedside table drawer. And so we're always negotiating, this continuum. And I think young people are actually quite savvy about their privacy in ways that older people might not recognize. Like things like managing multiple social media accounts to maintain different identities for different sort of social groups. That's how they're sort of managing their identity across different systems. Whereas people who put everything on Facebook are actually not really protecting their privacy in such a sophisticated way. The other interesting thing about the pandemic that I think has awakened young people to some of the problems of privacy, especially kids in college who have had to install really invasive proctoring software. So as school has gone online for the pandemic and students in college are taking tests, they've been forced to install this really horrible software on their computers to, allegedly prevent them from cheating. And the stuff that happens when they're doing has been traumatic for many students. And it's given them a taste in really intimate ways that's affected them very emotionally and personally, in their just school life experience of what it would be like to live in a surveillance society what it would be like to live under the gaze of a camera where every body motion is measured and tracked and traumatizes you into the correct behavior. I think it's an example, like you were talking about before, about how the pandemic is waking people up to possible futures that we don't want. That the idea that kids had to install this really terrible software to take a test for college during the pandemic showed them a glimpse of a terrible future that they don't want. And so, when young people see films like The Great Hack and talk about it, and especially in the context of colleges and universities, they have a sophisticated understanding of these issues. They actually think about what's at stake, right, and can imagine it in the context of artificial intelligence. And then it just becomes even clearer how important these issues are.
No, for me, it goes back to the book 1984. I mean, the television, or this phone was the center of life and the center of being tracked. You brought up The Great Hack. You're featured in the Emmy and BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts awards. You're featured in this nominated film, The Great Hack documentary on Netflix. I haven't seen it yet, but it's on my now to-do list because of this postal story. I'm going, I need to learn more.
Sure, that's great. Yes, The Great Hack is on Netflix. It was released in the summer of 2019, and it's been instrumental in telling the story of what happened in 2016, the Facebook scandal, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the intersection between advertising, the big platforms, and our very democracy. And the story didn't just happen in the US, it happened in other countries around the world. And so it ends up binding us all together. So I think you'll find it really interesting, brings you deep inside the company and just how dodgy things got.
Yeah, and how bad they're going to get. Like just the other day, I was talking about a story that CNBC was talking about. Because they were talking about woke capitalism, and there's this group that's going to be funding a 7-figure ad campaign that they're going to do it on CNBC. So they were literally doing a story about an advertiser, like it was an actual news story, that someone's going to give them money. And I'm going, isn't there some ethical line that you're walking all over?
The boundaries are blurry between all of these things. I think that's something that you come to experience in The Great Hack when you watch the film, and it helps us understand some of the other things we were talking about.
Good stuff. Again, The Great Hack, we'll get links out on how folks can take a look at that. The Great Hack Doc is their Twitter handle. Check it out on Netflix. But David, I appreciate the thoughts, the time, and your expertise. I hope you'll come back and share some more as this continues down the road.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Good stuff, David Carrol. Make sure you check out the Great Hack documentary. Like I said, we'll get links out on social media. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the dawn.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day that workers at the Jones and Laughlin plant in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, voted in the first ever union election in the United States steel industry under the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Act had been passed 2 years earlier, guaranteeing workers the right to join and form a union. But the steel industry had long stood against union organizing. In Pennsylvania, anti-union bosses in steel and coal often had the backing of the state militia. Workers who dared to talk union were harassed and fired. George Laughlin, a steel worker at Jones and Laughlin, found out just how far the company would go to keep the union out of their plant. When George was injured on the job, he took up a part-time job organizing. The company pulled strings and had him committed to the state's lunatic asylum. He was only released after the governor intervened. Governor Griffin Pinchot was a progressive who dared to stand up to the steel companies. The passage of the National Labor Relations Act gave workers the support of the federal government to stand up for their rights as workers. After the votes were counted, it was declared that the workers had overwhelmingly chosen the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, or SWOC, as their bargaining agent. Jones and Laughlin agreed to rehire the workers that had been fired due to their union activity. They also had to pay these workers back pay, and the company agreed to sit down and bargain with the union. The next year, the giant of the steel industry, U.S. Steel, signed its first contract with SWOC. Union recognition had finally come to the steel mills.
Well, what did Jones and Laughlin steal? Pittsburgh.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's going on out in Arizona, but wow. What a circus it has been. You have this Republican-led, I don't know that I want to call it a recount. I don't really know what they're doing, but you've got top officials out there saying that it's a grift disguised as an audit, a sham process, a circus. It's time to be done with this craziness. In fact, you've got the Secretary of State of Arizona, who evidently reached out to the Department of Homeland Security and other groups, and they've told her, after this is done, you got to chuck all those machines. You can never use that election infrastructure ever again. They have so badly screwed this up. Going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Because, my first thought is you gave them access to it, they're going to figure out how to screw it up and hack into it and do all the things that they claim actually happened. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, this, and I can't wait to get to the Matt Gaetz stuff. I've asked Renato Mariotti to come talk with us. Renato's a former federal prosecutor, also host of the On Topic podcast. Highly suggested. Make sure you check out iTunes, all the places you get your podcasts. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. Always glad to be on your show, Rick.
So a circus, a sham. Can't use the machines ever again. It's grift disguised as an audit.
Yeah, I think grift disguised as an audit's a good way of putting it. I don't take it seriously. I actually think if we had some truth serum put in these Republican legislators, they would admit the same thing. There is essentially this feeling out there, right, based on Trump's lies by a lot of Republicans in the base that, hey, this election was stolen. They've got all sorts of crazy theories that, like, there's bamboo in the ballots, which shows they're from China. I mean, it's like a racist. Like the idea that they think that bamboo in a piece of paper determines its origin. Like it's so ignorant is what it is. It's just incredibly ignorant and sad. It would be sad if it wasn't such a serious threat to our democracy when people are questioning its legitimacy with absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah, and some of the crazy stuff, because I had a guy yesterday, actually tell me, well, you saw the story, didn't you? Of the guy who drove the ballots from Philadelphia to Bethpage to another place and then back again. You saw that? I go, yeah, they were empty ballots. They were never used. So what part of the conspiracy are you now claiming they were not used? He goes, but they were driving them around. I'm going, okay.
Yeah, it's really one of these things where it's a conclusion in search of evidence, and they want to find some way to say the election's stolen. The problem, of course, is Arizona wasn't even decisive. This wasn't one of these elections that came down to a few hundred votes in Florida like we had back in 2000. I mean, this is like not particularly close election. So, I got to tell you, while this is horrible for our nation, it is a good thing that the Republicans are divided, that the Republicans are focused on, figuring out whether the moon landing was real, or that sort of thing. And that's basically where the level of what they're up to right now. because I'll tell you, when they get serious about things, it's like taking away our voting rights. It's busting unions, things that, really can change people's pocketbooks, can change people's right to basic rights. What's concerning here, of course, is something deeper, which is trust and faith in our democracy and our electoral process.
Absolutely. One of the things that I keep saying to these people who go, have you seen this and have you seen that? And did you hear about the guy who found the guy who saw the guy who knew a guy? Yeah, you've heard these anecdotal stories. And for me, it comes back to, I don't care what Rudy Giuliani said in front of the landscaping store. I don't care what Donald Trump said on the phone here in Gettysburg. I don't care what they were screaming on the street corner or what billboards they were walking on. I care about what they said in the court of law. So when all those lawyers went into those courtrooms, they didn't bring any of those things up. And that, to me, maybe you can help me because, as a former federal prosecutor, maybe you got a better insight. Why didn't they bring all of this conspiracy? Why didn't they bring all of these facts, all these things that we know are true? Why didn't they bring them into the court?
Well, courts, and this is one of the good things about them. I know a lot of people watching and listening were disappointed in courts during the Trump presidency because they didn't solve all of our problems. But one great thing about them is they have a way of getting to the bottom of things and figuring out what truth is. And I'll tell you, a lawyer who makes a false statement to a federal judge or a state judge can have their butts handed to them. It can be a very, very significant problem for that attorney. So attorneys don't loosely just make up stuff to tell the judge or say things they don't believe. There are some attorneys, maybe Rudy Giuliani, who are willing to do that. They're willing to do a lot of things, but almost no one's willing to do that. And if they do, the end result's going to be that it's going to be tested and the evidence is going to matter. And ultimately, it wouldn't bear out, and then they would be in a worse spot. And so I agree with you, Rick. That, to me, was the absolute arbiter here, is that so many courts looked at this. And not only did the courts all throw all this stuff out, but these guys didn't even make those arguments in court because they didn't really believe them. That's
my point. My point is, all the hyperbole aside, all of the antics and the show trials and all of the stuff that they did, they didn't bring any of that into the courtrooms where the person with the robes and the stick, with the gavel, where it mattered. They didn't bother to do that because they knew it was all grift. I want to get your thoughts on, to change topics, some fun going on in Florida. You got Joel Greenberg, who has come out and pled guilty to 6 very serious felonies. Could spend a good part of the rest of his life in jail. Didn't get the 34, 35 felony counts, but 6. There's talk he could be singing quite loudly against one Florida representative. Any thoughts? Any background?
Yeah, well, first of all, what I would say is, yes, Mr. Greenberg's crimes were very serious. He's a guy, certainly he committed so many different crimes. He's like one of these people who was like, some people like to visit every state. He wanted to commit every crime in the U.S. code. But, some of them are particularly serious. Like, for example, sex trafficking of a minor is a very, very serious and heinous offense. People sometimes will make light of or laugh about the Gaetz case because Matt Gaetz is a ridiculous person, or kind of a bizarre person. But there's nothing funny or bizarre about that crime, which changes the lives of young girls and women. And so, what I would just say is that, Greenberg is, not only pleading guilty to all those things, but he was pleading guilty pursuant to a cooperation agreement in which he's agreeing to cooperate fully with the government against anybody. And that would include Gaetz. Now, what I think is interesting about that, Rick, is that the government agreed to give it to him. And that really says something to me, because I will tell you, prosecutors are careful about who they give cooperation deals to. And this guy is a total piece of crap, right? And so if you're giving that guy, and by the way, he's not going to make a great witness because he's literally like a convicted fraudster at this point, okay? So if you're giving that guy a deal, he's going to be you are convinced as a prosecutor that he's going to deliver a very significant case to you against someone else.
No, and that's where my mind was at. I'm going, he's got to have videotapes or something. He's got to be bringing something more to the table well, he was there with me. Yeah, I did it, but he was there too. It's got to be more than just that.
Yeah, you don't want to ever, prosecutors are very reluctant to give credit for cooperating downward. In other words, the mob kingpin gets caught and he's like, well, my driver, was in on it, right? It's like, we don't care about that. Or, it's like the drug dealer. It's like, the courier or something. It's always you're trying to work your way up. Maybe you work your way sideways. People get very little credit for punching down, so to speak. So Greenberg, he's going to, I would expect that there's going to be very significant cases that are made there. So, Matt Gaetz has a lot to worry about.
How high do you think this could go? I mean, is Gaetz the top of the food chain here, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, we don't know enough of the evidence, but look, they're trafficking around these young girls, and he was in all sorts of circles. So who knows? I hope it's more limited on those charges I just hope there wasn't other women who were exploited.
Yeah. I mean, but you look at Gaetz as, this was a guy who, from what it appears now, this is a guy who just, again, back to wants to break every law under the sun. Go through his election, his campaign finances. There's a lot of questionable things on that front, aside from all of the despicable stuff, sniffing crack off the backside of a hooker and those kind of things. There's a whole bunch of, campaign stuff that could land him in as a guest of the state for a very long time.
Yeah, well, look, one of the issues that Matt Gaetz has is that he's essentially admitted to behavior that, while not criminal, is absolutely reprehensible. And so he better hope that he's not charged with anything, because if they charge him with, let's say, a campaign finance crime related to prostitution, related to drug use, all of this stuff, the jury's going to hate this guy. They're not going to like the guy who's taking his campaign funds and using them for prostitution. And so he better hope that they don't have him dead to rights on a campaign finance violation, because it could be the sort of case where if he spent it on, food or mortgage payments, maybe the jury might think, well, did he technically, is there enough proof? Do we have any doubt? It's like, there's gonna be no doubt as to this guy when what he's doing with his shenanigans. So he's put himself in a difficult position, and he may pay the price for that. Yeah,
for those of us who never really liked him, this is one of those well-deserved. You knew he was this potentially this kind of person. So
yep.
No tears.
He's one of those guys like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Madison Crawthorne or any of them that are just sort of like, these people are not serious people in any way.
Lastly, before I let you go, I wanted to get some thoughts on, there's some talk of the New York attorney, the Manhattan district attorney and New York. They're coming together to do something and to look at the Trump organization. How much of the press release that they did is actual and how much of it was just, hey, we're just looking for attention?
Well, the press release the other day was largely about the New York Attorney General taking credit and saying, we're part of this too. And that, that's interesting, although we already knew the Manhattan DA was looking at Trump. But what I would say is the fact that she's rushing to say, yes, we are a part of this and we're all in, tells you it must be a pretty good case, because she's not going to be running and wrapping her arms around this case and essentially marrying herself to this case, whether it wins or loses, if she thought it was a real stinker. So I think it's going somewhere.
And what do you think the charges are? What do you think they're looking at? The tax stuff, I'm sure. But what is it that you think they're focusing on?
Well, look, we've seen a lot of reports, starting with that New York Times investigation that, by the way, really got underappreciated in the Trump era. These things would be a story for a week, but that research that the New York Times did was really something, where they compared what he was telling lenders versus what he was telling investors in his buildings in terms of valuation. That to me is really hard to explain away. If you're saying the building's worth 100 million to one group and 200 million to the other, you're either lying to Peter or you're lying to Paul, so to speak. So I think that's real problematic. And then you said there in that, so that could potentially even be a securities issue under New York law, Martin Act, or you could have potentially a tax issue. Those are the ones that come to mind. But there may be, who knows, there may be other things as well.
Yeah, because I'm getting my Trump supporter friends who are saying, well, it's just all a big witch hunt. They're just going after him because they don't like him. So how much of this is, well, they just don't like him, and how much of this, the guy was a criminal all along?
It's an interesting thing. I will say this. As to Leticia James, there's an argument for Trump and his team to make on that because she ran for office. She's a politician. She ran for office, and she said she was going to investigate Trump. Manhattan DA, not as much. I mean, he's a guy who's retiring. He's not running for re-election. He's more of a career prosecutor type. A little harder to make that argument against him. But, the bottom line is, regardless of any of that, and all the arguments around that, and I get it, as now I'm a criminal defense attorney, I get the arguments that you would make. What's going to matter in the end is what the evidence looks like. And if they got the evidence, they're not going to bring the case unless they think they can win it. And when a jury looks at this evidence, that's what's really going to matter. The law, whether there's these lies in financial statements or not.
Yeah. Before I let you go, since you brought up you're a criminal defense attorney, and I knew that, sure. I had to get your thoughts on this criminal defense attorney who is he's the lawyer for this Q shaman guy, this Jacob Chansley, sure. who did an interview over a Talking Point memo, who said that of the people who invaded our capital, of the insurrectionists, that they're all, effing short bus people, that they've got brain damage, that they're the R word, that they're on the spectrum, but they're good people. They're our brothers and our sisters. They aren't bad people. It's all Trump's fault. Is that a workable defense? Is that one you would want to take into a court of law with these people?
Well, look, you don't want to demean your client. So there's elements of it that are okay. The execution's off. Okay. So you always want to, no matter what your client's done, you got to humanize your client to the judge. And he really should have just stuck to himself personally and not these other people. In other words, if I was representing the Q shaman guy, it would be like, look, my client's clearly got, some mental health issues. Let's take pity on him. He's dressing up like, a lunatic, and, he believes a bunch of bizarre things. He's clearly been misled. I will bring in some psychiatrist or some mental health expert who could testify about his mental state, try to develop sympathy for him, and basically say, look, it's all the president of the United States, the one who's truly culpable. He just was a rube. I think that argument does make sense, but sitting there using that kind of language, which is totally unacceptable, and certainly, though, not just about other people, which it's unacceptable there, but about your own client. I don't know of any lawyer who talks to about their client that way. I mean, you could say, look, my client is not the smartest guy, he's not the mastermind who'd have come up with this scheme. Maybe something like that, but that's about as much as I go in terms of putting down my client to the judge.
That's where your line is. Okay, so we got it. But I thought I had to bring that up because it did make me laugh. But Renato, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Always great talking to you. I hope people will check out the On Topic podcast. We'll get links out on how folks can do that. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Rick.
Good stuff from Renato Mariotti. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1926. That was the day President Calvin Coolidge signed the Railway Labor Act. For decades, railroad labor disputes had often become bloody affairs. The railroad companies hired gunmen who killed dozens of strikers in 1877. The strike was so violent, it became known as the Great Upheaval. In Scranton, Pennsylvania, for example, hired guns shot into an unarmed crowd of strikers. 3 innocent people were killed. In 1894, the Pullman strike had paralyzed interstate commerce and ended with violent repression by federal troops. Starting in 1888, the federal government passed a series of acts aimed at stopping these bloody battles. Then, during World War I, railroad operations came under government control. Labor disputes were sent to a national board of adjustment during the war. This all laid the groundwork for the Railway Labor Act. The goal was to find a better way to resolve railroad labor management disputes. Representatives from the railroad companies and the unions participated in drafting the act. It called for a system of mediation for railroad labor contracts, and only after the mediation had been exhausted could the parties attempt other means, such as strikes or lockouts. Most significantly, it recognized the right for railroad workers to unionize. Under the act, employers can hire replacement workers during a strike, but they must take back the striking workers when the strike is over. For an industry that has had a notorious history for firing those who even hinted at a strike, this was an important change. In 1936, the act was extended to include airline workers. The act is considered an important step toward the creation of the National Labor Relations Act. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at laborhistoryin2.
Outrageous, screeched the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It doesn't feel fair, whimpered a top corporate executive. The wailing by those who run corporate America is not for the plight of the workaday families who've seen their income stagnate and even plummet to zero during the past months of the coronavirus pandemic. Rather, this chorus of woe comes from powerful plutocratic interests that have been enjoying windfall profits. Why? Because, they cry, that meanie in the White House, Joe Biden, intends to jack up their corporate tax rate. But wait, didn't Trump and the GOP Congress slash the corporate share of our nation's upkeep nearly in half just 4 years ago, shifting the burden to the middle class and poor? Yes. And didn't they promise that those cuts would create millions of new jobs? Yes, again. Yet, corporations got richer and working stiffs got shafted. Still, here they come again, howling that raising corporate taxes would crash the stock market. Well, the day Biden announced his plan, stock prices did fall by less than 1%. The next day, they bounced right back, and they're still booming. Moreover, those are crocodile tears the rich are shedding. For they know that, as Biden himself makes clear, his proposed uptick in their tax share, quote, is not going to affect their standard of living at all, not a little tiny bit. They'll still have their 2 or 3 big houses, private jets, and yachts. But with them paying just a little bit more toward the common good, our country will be able to reinvest in society's physical and human infrastructure, making America stronger and fairer for all. This is Jim Hightower saying that's why there is broad and deep public majorities, even among Republicans, for Biden's infrastructure plan and for the taxes to pay for it. For more information, go to americansfortaxfairness.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, evidently, remember when the FBI raided Rudy Giuliani's place, or his places? Evidently, they seized 18 electronic devices. Uh-oh. I wonder if there are any pictures of underage girls there from Matt Gaetz. Look, you saw the Borat movie. It's in the head. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the electronic devices and all of the top stories of the day. Our good friend Sarah Burris, reporter at RawStory. Make sure you check out her work, rawstory.com. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, happy Thursday.
So 18 devices, 18 different. What are you doing with 18 different devices? How important does he think he is?
So one of the things actually is he's done a couple of different interviews where he basically revealed that he was carrying 3 different phones at once. There was another call he did to Lev Parnas, I want to say sometime last year, where he left a message for him saying, I'm not going to be using this phone for much longer, this phone number for much longer. So that really leads me to believe that there are a series of burner phones going on here. And I wonder if that is why the DOJ looked first at his iCloud account before they did anything else, because, you know, he's switching phones so much that, you know, what is on there? What is on there that's not, you know, that is, you know, are you going to find all of them? Are you going to find how many of them is he chucked in the East River? And which you would think would be most of them, but apparently not. Apparently all of his electronics are just sitting around the house and just waiting for the FBI to come.
Just keeping them for old time's sake. You know, you got one for Russia, we got one for the Ukraine, we've got one for Romania, we got one for Iran, we got one, you know, helping the MEK Mujahideen cult. We've got every bit of graft, every bit of chicanery, each a device for its own thing.
We technically do not know that.
No,
allegedly.
We don't. But I'm guessing. I'm guessing because that's how I would probably do it. You want to keep your crimes, you know, segregated.
Yeah, if you're going to crime, then you better crime smart. So, and clearly he thought he was, but maybe not so much.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I'm interested to find out what was on the devices, and I'm sure at some point in the future there'll be a trial, and some of that will certainly come out. Speaking of trials, the January 6th commission, 35 Republicans, wayward Republicans, the former guy called them, 35 of them. You surprised at the number?
I was a little bit. I expected a whole different series of officials to vote for this, because this bill has a bunch of the stuff in it that the Republican bill had that was co-sponsored by 30 Republicans. And so what was weird is that 16 of those other 30 Republicans from the first time the bill was proposed I think it was proposed right after it happened.
Right.
And so it was when everything was fresh. And so there were 16 additional Republicans who voted for that bill, but voted against this one, even though what is in the first bill is actually in the second one as well. So there's a whole new subset of these Republicans. The other thing that was interesting to me is that of these 35, they're kind of all over the place. Like there's an Arkansas, there's the Californias, like they're not all, you know, New York Republicans or California Republicans or, you know, the coastal people or near urban areas. They're a pretty good swath of Republicans who are supporting this thing. The other thing that happened, interestingly, is I want to say an hour before the vote happened, when they were doing a bunch of the speeches on the floor, the Capitol Police released a letter that basically took them to task. All of these Republicans who've been saying these terrible things about it didn't happen. It was just
it was
peaceful.
These folks
it was peaceful.
Just another day.
It wasn't. There were tourists. They weren't actually armed. All of these things. The on the job. Some of them died. A guy lost his eye. One lost his finger. Like this is a big deal. And so for these police officers to come forward, that's a surprise to me. And I think that if that had some more breathing room, I wonder if that will hit the Senate a little bit harder. You've got the 35 Republicans, and you've got that letter from the Capitol Police. I wonder if that's going to sway some Republicans. Going
to be interesting to see. But this, to me, again, is another one of those moments where, and you know where I'm going with this. This is a failure of the Democratic Party to act in a timely manner. This should have happened immediately. Because like you said, you know, back then you had all these people when it was fresh, they were on board. But now that the narrative is being shifted, now that the right-wing spin machine is working overtime going, no. It was peaceful. They were walking between the ropes. Didn't you see them? They were going between the stanchions. They were peaceful. Even though the guy who said it is barricading himself inside of a room with the look of terror in his eye. But no, it was peaceful.
It's so frustrating because I completely agree. If we had done this right after then I think it would have been quickly passed. I think Republicans would have been too terrified because of the newness of it. The excuses though that they're coming up with, I think that's the funny part, because you had Congressman Katko from New York, who basically helped write this commission bill with the Democrats, who put all of this stuff in that Republicans wanted and got Democrats to agree to it. The guy basically goes up on the floor and has a list of all of the BS that the Republicans have been making up about it, and just like checks off where like each one explains why it's a lie, every single one of them. And so again, like this is something where if it goes to the Senate, it's already gone to the Senate.
Right.
Chuck Schumer has said that he's not even sending it to committee; he's sending it straight to the floor. I think one of the best things that he could do is have a legitimate, hold the floor filibuster on it.
Absolutely.
I think the Republicans, if they're going to filibuster this, they need to stand up there and explain to the American people why they don't believe this.
Exactly. And this, as I said yesterday, I go, the reality is this could be that moment where you go, now it's time to get rid of the filibuster. This is too important to allow McConnell to continue to play these games. But on the Katko front, Republican from New York, when does he get canceled? When did they oust him?
You got to wonder, right? Because already McCarthy's thrown the poor guy under the bus. I think that's actually what he said. I think he was just like, thanks for throwing me under the bus, Kevin. And you feel bad for him because it's like, well, what did you expect? I mean, I knew that McCarthy was never going to support this, and he was going to, try and drag it out as long as possible.
Yeah, because he's going to have to testify.
Yeah. And that's the thing that Liz Cheney said. And if you watch that interview that she did with Chris Wallace on Fox News, it kind of felt like they both knew something that they weren't saying. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it really seems like they were talking about Kevin McCarthy knew something, and that is the big reason that he is trying to stop this commission from happening. I don't know if it's because of him. I don't know if it's because he knows some things about members, but I have to believe that the DOJ probably knows, all the stuff about the members, but they're gonna do kind of the same thing as Matt Gaetz. They're gonna make sure they have all their ducks in a row before anybody gets indicted.
Yeah.
But I do think that, this is exactly like the 9/11 Commission. We have to figure out like what happened, what were the warning signs that were ignored, and what do we need to do after the fact to secure the Capitol better, to make sure everybody is trained appropriately, and to protect the building again.
See, I think everyone's trained fine. I think everything. No, I do. I think everything was workable. I think you had leadership that was told there are people. They're good people. Which is why, because we've talked about this before. You've been to rallies and stuff there. When were you ever allowed to bring a metal pole into that area? Never.
And the thing is, too, is the Capitol Police kind of get a lot of leeway to do whatever they want to protesters. And the DC Metro cops, they don't have that as much. They've been sued so many times. They're really more terrified of doing the wrong thing. But Capitol Police kind of get a little bit more of a leash to do crazy stuff, to drag Jane Fonda into a paddy wagon or whatever. And so when you see these guys with these big poles and weapons, like people had guns and were armed, and bear spray and taking tasers from the cops and the guns from the cops, like this is really surprising. And the fact that they were allowed to get away with it just blows my mind. I get though, like the big thing that everybody kind of talked about is why didn't they shoot them? I don't know that they could have. I think they would have been overrun.
I think had they opened fire, had there been more shots, I think they believed that they were outgunned, that the people in the crowd had more powerful weapons and more of them, that it would have been a bloodbath.
I think so too. I think they kind of were scared of just the sheer number, and they didn't know how many people had weapons or not.
Yeah, and it's one of those things they were reading that. There's no way they weren't reading those social media, because I was. Because I woke up the morning of it, I go, how much blood is going to be in the streets today? That was the first thing I said. And you had this this insanity that if you're in the leadership of the Capitol Police, you had to know what was coming.
Yeah.
Because
And it
people
really
made their
surprises
intentions
me.
clear. They were very open and honest there on Parler and elsewhere.
It really surprises me that not more was done, because there was so much talk about taking the Capitol and about, like, breaching the Capitol to stop that vote. And I am still to this day really shocked that the Capitol Police didn't, they weren't prepared for that.
Yeah, and I think they weren't prepared
think that we
for
should
it.
know why.
I think they weren't prepared for it on purpose. I think they were sacrificed.
Maybe.
Just my
I think
thought.
we need to know why. I think we need to make sure we investigate the hell out of it and we find out why, and we hold people responsible.
Absolutely. And this is why you wrote a story I thought was a great quote. An ex-Breitbart staffer said that, Republicans serving on the January 6th Commission is like Al-Qaeda on the 9/11 Commission. I found that to be quite interesting.
I know. I was like, oh, he went there, because that is a bold statement. And I mean, honestly, when you start talking about whether or not Republican members were involved in the planning of this, he's kind of right.
See, for me, there are 3 or 4 different areas that have to be investigated. First, obviously are the idiots who went in and defecated on the floor and urinated on the desks and broke everything up. That's one part of it. Then there are the representatives and the political class who was riling these people up. There's Trump, there's Gaetz, Hawley, Green, and Boebert, and the whole clan. There's them. And then there's like the media culture, like Alex Jones and that right-wing spin machine that has, in those groups that were hyping this stuff up, the militia groups, all those folks. And then for me, the most important part of it, the people who funded all of them. These billionaires who have been spending money, pumping these groups up, organizing the bus trips in, organizing the flights in. Those are the people I think we really have to go after. Everyone else, that's just we're gonna hold someone accountable. It's the moneyed people that I'm most concerned with.
And one of the things you saw from the campaign finance records is that the Women for Trump effort was the one that really tried to organize it from the beginning. But then the Trump campaign actually came in and took everything over. And I think they were the ones who really spent a lot of money on making sure there was a big fancy stage, getting all the speakers and, all the screens and whatever the hell it is that they get. But that was a big piece of the thing that Women for Trump actually talked about in some of the interviews that they did, is that, they didn't plan on it being this really big thing. It was sort of just this informal protest or gathering march, or it wasn't going to be a huge rally. And it wasn't until after Trump took over everything that it became what it did. And I mean, he said it from the podium, we're going to walk up the street. I'm going to be with you, and we're going to stop the vote.
Yeah. But so is the defense, because I've been getting a lot of mileage out of this lawyer for the Q shaman guy. I'm sure you read the whole bit. I'm not going to go through it again. Claiming that they're the short bus people, that they're brain damaged, and the R word on the spectrum, all these things. But hey, they're our friends and neighbors and loved ones, and they're good people. Is that a defense? I mean, because you said yourself, Trump riled them all up, pointed them in the direction. Is Fox-itis a defense?
No, that's disgusting. This idea that they were trying to equate people who are mentally challenged or physically challenged with terrorists is absolutely yes. And I was so offended hearing that being the excuse. The reality is people knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe they had Fox-itis, but they knew it was wrong. Like, here's the thing, is they knew the difference between right and wrong.
Did they?
They're not people who can... Yeah, I think they absolutely did. I think that they may have thought, oh, Trump will pardon us or Trump will take care of us, but they knew that this was a crime. You can't blow through a federal building that is closed down for security purposes.
Yeah, but if your president tells you you can, if your president says, yeah, go ahead, they're okay. I'm kidding.
But if
No, I
that's the
mean,
case,
but that's the
then-
argument, isn't it? Our president told us to do it, which is why they were quite happy to record their treason and broadcast it and put it out on social media.
And I think if they go to that degree, if they start having 10 or 20 of these 400 and some odd people who've been arrested say that as a defense, then, I'd love to see that grand jury indictment and bring them in and just be like, well, he told us to. Just have one after another say he told us to. I don't know, though, that is a legitimate defense, that would work in court. You'd have to ask, Mr. Graybeard, who talked to you before me, who would know a lot better than me. But I can't imagine that would be a legitimate defense.
It's going to be interesting to watch that play out. And look, I think, during the commission's, report, I'm sure some of that's going to come up. Let's move along. Evidently, Melania Trump had a nice long $64,000 spa weekend on us. But, she just needed to get her nails done. Bill Clinton had a $400 haircut.
Oh, I forgot about that. That was forever ago.
So did John Edwards.
Yeah, John Edwards had an expensive haircut too, but I think that was because they had to fly the person. He had to do it on a plane, and then they had to fly him back, and that's why it was so expensive, because it was the dude's time for a full day or something, or the woman's time. I don't know. But yeah, so Melania Trump, found out about Stormy Daniels and the affair, and was in a very bad mood and just needed to go to the spa. And the spa weekend that she spent ended up costing American taxpayers $65,000, and that did not include the spa treatment. So I don't know what kind of mud wraps she had, or facials, or zapping, or whatever, but that was just for Secret Service for the weekend and flying her on I think Air Force Two down to Florida to have her weekend.
Now you remember when Obama used to go to Hawaii, they used to, he spent a lot of money. Obama spent a lot of money, going to Hawaii, once a year for vacation. How does it compare between what Obama did and which made the Republicans apoplectic, and what Trump actually got away with?
Not even close. Trump spent over, conservatively speaking, $600 million for the 4 years that he was covered by Secret Service. And that is only counting the rooms and the travel. That does not count any kind of, reimbursements or things that are not, I think these are all just public things that the Secret Service has handed over. They haven't told us about any additional spending. One of the biggest ticket items was in securing Trump Tower, because Melania would not come to the White House for the first several months that they were in the White House, and she made up this story that, we want to make sure our son finishes the semester, he finishes the school, and then we'll move to the White House after that. The reality was that we found out in the book, The Art of Her Deal, was that she was negotiating her prenup. And that's why she wasn't going to the White House. That was her leverage. And so you and I, the American taxpayer, paid something like $38 million to secure the top 3-floor penthouse floors of Trump Tower. And then they hardly ever go there now. And it's just like, can we get some of that back? If this sells, obviously, if they sell the penthouse at Trump Tower, that's gonna raise the cost and the value of it. So if it sells for that much, I feel like they owe a taxpayer, at least a couple million in a check.
But Sarah, he gave his salary back. He didn't work for a salary. He donated it back to the country. He loved America.
$200,000, 4 years. Which means that he donated $800,000 and he spent $600 million.
Isn't it
I feel like
$400,000?
we're getting the bad end of this deal.
Isn't it $400,000 a year?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's $400,000.
I don't remember.
But that's we get your point. It's $1.6 million, and he got $600 million back.
Yeah.
Let me do the math here.
For real. And I mean, we don't even know the extent to which, people were using his stuff overseas because of the whole, military stopping over at his club in Scotland. There's so much stuff that he made money off of, and it's got to just be. And the idiot is still losing money. That's the thing that's so crazy is he totally scammed the system on every one of his properties for 4 years, and the dude still can't make money.
He had the treasury. He was robbing the treasury and still couldn't figure out how to make it profitable.
I know, right? It's just like, you are such a terrible businessman that you can't even scam the right way. Like, your criming even sucks. Talk to Rudy. He's at least got 18 phones.
He's at least got 18 phones. And he might be able to trade those in on I'll bet you one of them's got to be a flip phone. At least one.
Oh, man. Don't you know? Like, and that's the one that he prefers, right? That's the one he likes the best. There was a thing in the Olivia Newsy story from, I think, last year, where she said that he accidentally hit the Siri button and he was complaining about it, where it was just like, she never understands me. It's like, maybe it's you that doesn't understand how to use technology.
Yeah. And that's the weird thing, because, and this is where, I'm looking at this, you've got 18 phones. Look, to be able to have burner phones and to go through that whole process, you have to have some level of sophistication. You can't just start a new phone and use your Gmail account, because it hooks to a cloud, and it's all trackable. So you've got to have a level of sophistication, or somebody who has that level of sophistication, which broadens your ability to get caught, because now you've brought somebody else in. That's always troublesome. So I'm really interested to find out I hope we find out someday what's on those phones or those electronic devices.
I mean, I just feel like you can learn more by watching mafia movies on what you should be doing with those phones, right? Like, I feel like I learned from TV how to crime better than Rudy Giuliani. Like, you have the East River. Nobody's going in that. Like, there's God knows how many bodies are at the bottom of that river. Just, take the SIM card, break it in half, and chuck it in there. Like, there you go.
That's where a $7.99 hammer from the local hardware store does wonders. And then you chuck it in the East River.
You don't even have to hammer it. Like, you can really just throw it in the water and it's going to kill it.
I still like to make sure. I like the double protection of the hammer and the water.
Yeah.
Finally, got to get your thoughts on Michael Cohen. Evidently, Michael Cohen thinks Donald, if he gets his things in a ringer, he's gonna throw the kids under the bus. You agree?
If anybody would know, it's gonna be Michael Cohen. Like, that's the thing, is that this dude knows Donald Trump better than, probably just as good as Alan Weisselberg. And Cohen was the fixer, right? So Weisselberg was the one that was just writing the checks. Cohen's the one who actually had to get in and do some dirty work. And so he knows everything about Donald Trump. And if he says it wouldn't put it past me. This idea of, Ivanka did that, or Alan took care of that, or I have accountants for that. It's just going to be a constant state of, I don't know, I didn't take care of that. And the reason that everybody seems to think that is because that's what he's done his entire life. Yep. Every single thing that he is responsible for, he passes it off to somebody else and blames somebody else. It's never his fault.
Yeah, because he's smart. I mean, to be honest, he is smart. He's like a Don. He never uses email. He doesn't put anything really incriminating in writing. I guarantee there's no emails from Weisselberg to him saying, "Hey, what we're doing is illegal." I'm sure it did go to Jared or Ivanka or one of the idiot sons. I'm sure, and he'll probably walk away scot-free.
Well, the thing that Cohen said is that at the time that he was working there, he was in Trump Tower working with Donald Trump, and he said that there was something like 13 other vice presidents or something. So my theory is that they probably just walked down the hall and said stuff to him and had a conversation, and there was no paper trail. That seems like, the kind of thing that his dad probably would have taught him from the beginning.
And that, again, my grandfather told me day one, never write anything down, never leave any messages, and certainly don't write anything you don't want your grandmother to see. So if you're criming, And he always used to say, if you're messing up, he used the F word. If you're messing up, make sure you're the only one who knows it. Because then you only got about a 50% chance of getting ratted out. You tell somebody else, it's certain you're busted.
Or here's the way that I operate. Don't do anything illegal. That's generally how I work. There's a start. Yeah, don't crime. Only crazy.
I got it.
No criming.
I'll have to remember that. But Sarah,
I float a stop sign every once in a while. That's pretty much all I got.
All right. Well, I know you're a wonderful person and you do great work there at RawStory. I hope people will take a look at it. As always, great talking with you, Sarah. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Our good friend Sarah Burris. Make sure you check out her work over at RawStory. She's a fantastic reporter. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show for working people. Come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The next decade, we call it really the decade of massive clean energy expansion.
International Energy Agency's landmark roadmap to reach net zero by 2050. Biden administration moves to innovate buildings. Plus,
it's time to bring the lightning.
Ford unveils its all-electric F-150 Lightning truck.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
If what Ford has done is build a Ford F-150 that is better than Ford F-150s that are powered by gas or diesel, this will change the game. This will change the climate. Literally.
Hope you're right. No snark. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I only wish Ford had made a bigger deal out of the introduction of their new all-electric F-150. But we're not starting there, are we?
No, we are not. We are beginning with the International Energy Agency, a partner to the United Nations. This week, the IEA released a landmark, comprehensive roadmap for humanity to reach net zero emissions by 2050, which scientists say is necessary to have a chance at avoiding catastrophic climate change.
That's important and a big report, but boy, could they use some of those Ford sound effects to introduce it.
Yes, they could. The IEA report spells out a realistic, cost-effective, and socially just path to meet the Paris Climate Agreement targets of keeping global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The IEA says the pathway to net zero by 2050 is narrow, but still achievable if governments act now. It's a huge report, but in a nutshell, by 2035, we need to phase out sales of new gas-powered vehicles. By 2050, generate 90% of global electricity from renewable sources. That requires rapid deployment of clean energy technologies at 4 times our current rate. We need to double our rate of improvement in energy efficiency and green hydrogen technology. And the biggest, the IEA says some fossil fuels will still be needed until renewables ramp up, but there is no need to develop any new fossil fuel supply projects beyond what is already slated in 2021.
That is good news, and it comes from the IEA, which is not exactly a lefty renewables organization, is it?
No, it is not. The fossil fuel industry has used the IEA's previous reports to justify new fossil fuel development. Now the IEA has just decimated that last excuse. Now, there has been some confusing reporting suggesting that we don't yet have half of the technology to reach net zero by 2050, that it hasn't been invented yet, but IEA Director Fatih Birol, in a statement, clarified, saying, quote, most of the reductions in CO2 emissions through 2030 come from technologies already on the market. However, in 2050, half of the emissions reductions will come from technologies that, while known, are still in development now. Or, as IEA climate modeler Laura Kotze put it,
we have all the technologies that we need. The good news is that most of them are here, are on the market, are cheaper than the alternative.
So we have all the tools we need, but new technologies are still developing and in the prototype stage, like carbon capture. Those will need massive innovation by 2030 to be commercially scalable in time for 2050. The Iea Roadmap projects that if governments act swiftly, it will create 14 million jobs and lift global economic growth in the 2020s. The Iea is hugely influential, and the report is a signal to world governments, the global banking and finance industry, and the fossil fuel industry.
And we will see if they hear it. As I said, this is not a lefty group. They have long supported the fossil fuel industry. So for them to say no more new fossil fuel development, this is a very big deal.
Yep. And in other news, the Biden administration announced it will establish the first ever energy efficiency and performance standards for federal buildings and will create an Energy Star rating system for homes. It will also invest in programs to speed up building innovation and adoption of next generation heat pumps and emissions saving technology.
Cool.
Finally, the other big news this week, Ford Motor Company on Wednesday unveiled its all-electric version of the Ford F-150 truck series, the best-selling vehicle in the United States. The F-150 Lightning, slated to come on the market next year, could potentially be a game-changer for the U.S. market. In a big presentation on Wednesday, Ford Chief Engineer Linda Zhang said the Lightning is actually better, faster, and does more than its gas-powered cousins, including this.
Intelligent backup power makes the F-150 Lightning your own personal power plant, automatically powering your house for 3 days during an outage. This is a first for an EV truck.
Well, it certainly is, and it might be a hell of a sales point if you live down in Texas. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I got to tell you, I saw the images of that Ford F-150 Lightning, and wow, that's a nice truck. The fact that it's if you listen to the Green News Report, I guess you can use it as a generator for your house if your the power ever goes out. Pretty impressive. I can't wait to see it. And look, I saw Joe Biden driving around in it. Way too cool. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. I have a Ford F-150.
Yeah, but not the Lightning, not the electric one. I've got one too. Mine's 21 years old.
Yeah, mine's rusted out, but it's still there. Right.
But I'm looking at this new one. Did you see the F1, the Lightning that they're talking about?
No, did not.
Yeah, I mean, Biden was, the thing looked like it had amazing pickup. Because some of the electric cars really do have some great pickup. I'm excited to see what this looks like.
That's interesting. Yeah, they do have good. When they first came out with electric cars, of course, they had to work out some bugs, but I've driven in, some of my friends' cars, and they're pretty cool. They keep the pace.
Yeah, and the good thing for me is, they're at least this first generation of F-150s, they're going to be making right here in the U.S. So this means, American steel. This means the technology, this potential of reviving the auto industry here at home.
A lot of good things made here.
Got to get your thoughts. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Greenland today and reassured the good folks of Greenland that no one's trying to buy Greenland from them.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I totally forgot about that when President Trump was going to buy Greenland, right?
Yeah. Actually put together a couple people to look into how much it would cost because he liked the idea of adding another state to the Union. Greenland. Yeah. Yeah.
See, I think if you were in the government there, it had been turned to our Secretary of State and said, "Well, didn't we tell you he bought that last week?" That would have been, I think.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things. Interesting to with the things that we've got to clean up with, and I got to do a little humor. Got to get some of your thoughts on the January 6th commission. Still kind of reframing this as a January 6th was, it was peaceful. There were good people there, all of that stuff. Are we surprised 35 people voted for it?
Well, there a couple of things have happened. Of course, the follow-up bill, not directly related, but in the same category of the $1.9 billion for security, which was a nail biter, by the way. But the first bill, the commission bill, I still think that they could have done the House view of what went wrong in the House. I think they could do it with the outside sources. But the argument on this bill became, of course, were the photo op-seeking tourists or were they insurgents? And again, I think if you were going to vote against this bill and you had a particular reason, you didn't add other groups that they wanted or something, that's one thing if they said that. But to try to make this bill the litmus test that you have to stand up and say, no, nobody did anything. They were just taking pictures.
Yeah.
That's just the most ridiculous, ludicrous thing, Rick, that anybody could try to want to follow. I just don't get it. What is wrong with saying, what happened? We know what happened. Had zip ties. They threatened to hang the Vice United States and the Speaker of the House. Those aren't tourists. Period.
Now, you brought up the funding bill that passed today in the House. Final vote 213 to 212. You had a number of I guess three progressive representatives who voted no against the bill with all of the Republicans, and then a number of them that just voted present. Is this a mutiny on the left, as some have said, or is this just sending a message?
Well, Representative Bowman, a Democratic member from New York, and Tlaib from Michigan, and AOC from New York voted present. And when you vote present, you're there, but you're not voting yes or no. Now, the inside baseball significant is this. They could have voted no, and the whole bill would have died. So they did the leadership a favor. I'm sure there's those three members, because one thing about voting present, we used to call it the duck pond. It's hard if the three are pressed and said, you really didn't stand up, too many police and arguments made on this bill. It's kind of hard for them to tell their supporters, well, I was just there, I voted present. But I think they'll probably get some concessions at some point in time out of it, where they'll feel more comfortable Democratic leadership that they're not just going to, put forth a lot of new money for law enforcement. But it did pass. I don't view it as a mutiny, although I will tell you this. When any speaker, I worked with Lofgren, who is chair of House Administration as I was, first director. When you've got a sort of a speaker's bill, Rick, then I think that it's not a mutiny, but the vote counters on the Democratic side need to get a little sharper, because it's a leadership bill, and for a leadership bill to go down is like a huge, problem politically, internally. But no, I don't think this is the end of the world. I think they're going to have to talk through some of this. And frankly, I looked at the bill, and again, I used to oversee the security of the Capitol for Speaker Hastert. I was involved with all of these things. I know what they're doing. I know what they're talking about. But honestly, I think there's some money in that bill that I don't know what they're going to do. Increase police surveillance and force for what? We get our information out of the NSA and the CIA, and if there was a failure there, they need to stop that. But to put the money in there to increase surveillance within the U.S. Capitol Force, I don't know what that's for.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And
I
now
can understand where this,
earlier in the program, we were talking about, evidently the Postal Service is doing a bunch of surveillance with AI and facial recognition software, following people's social media posts. There's all kind of stuff we're finding out now that the Postal Service is doing. Do I want the Capitol Police and law enforcement to have more of these tools to invade our privacy and to surveil everything we do? Absolutely not. I do find it interesting, however, that the people who are saying how much they love the police and they're the law and order folks who want to fund the police more all voted against it. Not one Republican voted for this bill.
Right, there was not one Republican vote. I think the bill probably get a bit retooled when it will come to. Of course, this is the House version of the bill. For overall security, they have to work, obvious Senate. I just think there were some flaws in it. The fear factor, we've got to address this, so we're going to put all this surveillance money in. And again, I was in charge of Capitol Hill Police. I know what surveillance we had. I know how we got our information on intel, et cetera. You don't want to recreate the NSA and the CIA cap. Let's say that. Right. You don't want to do that. And I've been a great supporter of the Capitol Hill Police, but I think spending that money to create our own service within the Capitol, it's not going to work.
So let me ask you this, because obviously you're well versed in this. What were the failures? I mean, when you start looking at this stuff, because I had this conversation earlier. I've been to rallies at the Capitol. I've been to protests where we've been on the Capitol steps and in the mall and all these places. You can't get anywhere near there. With metal flag poles or paper tubes, the best you're going to get. And even that, they better not be thick ones, because you can still use that as a weapon. To me, the failures happened well before the first person showed up because they didn't insist on those protections right from the start.
Right. First of all, look, I know there were some officers who took some selfies. Let's put that aside for a second.
Sure.
The majority of the Capitol Hill Police Force did a great job under a horrible non-win situation. Let me just say that right out front. They really did. They tried their best. Because somebody said, well, in the Capitol Rotunda, I want them to open fire, in the whole rotunda on everybody. I mean, it got to the point people were in the building. What are you going to do then? I think the failure, and I agree with you 100%, failure started at the top. First of all, I know from, getting all the security alerts when I chaired House Administration, and in fact, if Hosni Mubarak, when he would visit the Capitol, we would put in extra security alerts because we had so many threats. Dalai Lama, when we would have certain people, and then certain events, or if there were some protests, we prepared. They ignored everything, number one, or also they weren't given information. They ignored at the top level of the hierarchy, sergeant of arms, et cetera. They ignored the chief of police saying, "Hey, we have to do something." They ignored all of that, and then they just said, "Well, these are just people, supporting Trump. I guess maybe there'll be somebody made that call too. That's possible too." That whole failure started way before towards the Capitol.
Nope. I absolutely agree. It's just one of those things that, will we get to the bottom of this with this commission? Is it, will it even happen? I mean, I don't even know that it's going to happen.
I'm not sure. I mean, they have to prosecute, everybody that can from the, Justice Department level. The commission's got to work its way through the Senate. I don't know if it's really happened. If it doesn't happen, though, let me just say, internally, they have ways to do this, to make this work. Now, unfortunately, you don't have what you had, back when I was there. I had Stenier. We had John Larson after that. I had Congresswoman Kilpatrick. We had members on both sides of the aisle that really, really, really wanted to make the Capitol safer for the 10,000 people that worked in there, so they could go home to their families at night. If this falls, et cetera, the Republicans need to get in gear, sit down with the Democrats, and try to see how they can make that place safer, yet still accessible to the public.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this plays out. Finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on what's going on in Arizona. This recount has been described as a circus, grift disguised as an audit, a sham process. It's time to be done with the craziness. You've got the Secretary of State of Arizona saying that now that they've gone through all these machines and been given all this access, that they can never use these machines for elections in the future. I'm curious your thoughts on what's going on there.
Yes, the Arizona Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, today just advised Maricopa County officials that machines they were turned over to a private contractor carrying out the audit. And so Secretary of State says, look, she's got really big concerns, the security of the machines, who's had them, what could be done to them. They aren't connected to the internet, but you can things in machines. So I think they've got to have some caution, and at least they need somebody who's got beyond perfect expertise to take them. But the bottom line, Rick, is they lost custody of the machines.
Yep. No, this was a mess from the start. And the thing is Arizona wasn't even really an important state in the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm.
This was just where they thought they could make something up or finally come up with something. They've gotten bumpkiss. Sad stuff.
They are going to have to go through, if they're going to keep them, they're going to have to go through everything. What is losing? These things can be done without, why don't you take the machines, go somewhere, and call us when you're done?
Nope. Nope, they got to go. Going to be interesting to see how this, again, plays out. But, Bob, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day that workers at the Jones and Laughlin plant in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, voted in the first ever union election in the United States steel industry under the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Act had been passed 2 years earlier, guaranteeing workers the right to join and form a union. But the steel industry had long stood against union organizing. In Pennsylvania, anti-union bosses in steel and coal often had the backing of the state militia. Workers who dared to talk union were harassed and fired. George Laughlin, a steel worker at Jones and Laughlin, found out just how far the company would go to keep the union out of their plant. When George was injured on the job, he took up a part-time job organizing. The company pulled strings and had him committed to the state's lunatic asylum. He was only released after the governor intervened. Governor Griffin Pinchot was a progressive who dared to stand up to the steel companies. The passage of the National Labor Relations Act gave workers the support of the federal government to stand up for their rights as workers. After the votes were counted, it was declared that the workers had overwhelmingly chosen the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, or SWOC, as their bargaining agent. Jones and Laughlin agreed to rehire the workers that had been fired due to their union activity. They also had to pay these workers back pay. And the company agreed to sit down and bargain with the union. The next year, the giant of the steel industry, U.S. Steel, signed its first contract with SWOC. Union recognition had finally come to the steel mills.
Well, what did Jones and Laughlin steal? Pittsburgh.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
The Iowa governor, Kim Reynolds, Republican, says she's thrilled that when she signed into law the end of anywhere being allowed to mandate a mask in the state of Iowa. No one, Dubuque, none of that. Waterloo, nothing. Des Moines, nowhere. You have no ability to mandate masks anywhere in the state because the governor, remember, these are the people who believe in local control. These are the people who don't believe in an overarching, top-down kind of theory. She said that she's proud to be a governor of a state that values personal responsibility and individual liberty. I'm looking at this and I'm just going, crazy much? Look, if this is where I come back to local control, and I'm a supporter of it. If you have something going on, take care of it. Now, look, if the Republican Party was truly the party of personal responsibility, they'd have been wearing a masks without being told. This is what adults do. This is what grown-ups do. But, just having this tantrum, this is what children do. So I'm interesting. But here in Pennsylvania, we're going to we might get our own crazy governor in 2022 if we don't watch out. Yesterday we saw that Lou Barletta, the anti-immigrant guy, the anti-immigrant immigrant, he's thrown his hat into the ring. We're waiting for Doug Mastriano to throw his name in. I'm sure there are going to be a couple more. I'm hoping Shapiro runs. I think that's the best shot Democrats have to win in 2022. We'll see. On the Senate side of things, interesting primary for Democrats because John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, threw his name in earlier, had an early lead, very popular with young people. Connor Lamb, kind of a moderate Democrat, and I think more in the mind of a Bob Casey. He's rising, but the latest poll out by the Senate Democrat primary poll, 40% of folks polled are going to vote for Fetterman, 21% Connor Lamb, 9% for Malcolm Kenyatta, Chrissy Houlihan, 8%, Val Arkush, 5%, Sharif Street, who we had on the program the other night, pulling up the rear with 2%. 14% of folks don't know yet. But Fetterman, who to be honest is my choice. I think we need someone who understands the needs of working people. As the former mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, one of the poorest communities in the state, some of the work that he and his wife had done there, I think is fantastic, and the kind of ideas and the kind of thought process I'd like to see in the Senate. And look, I'd like to have one of the senators, kind of have to look up at him and yell at him. I'd love to see how that plays out. But on the other side, look, he's a fairly progressive guy. I mean, he's going to push for better wages. He's going to push for good jobs to come back here to Pennsylvania. I think he's a good guy. Now, all of the candidates, as I know, are good labor folks. Connor Lamb, heavily sponsored by labor in the western part of the state. Fetterman, I know personally, and I've known him for a number of years. Very strong labor guy. So for me, it's I'll take whatever we get, as long as it's not another union busting Republican. We need to pick up that seat in the Senate. If we're going to move an agenda in the coming years, if we're going to hold on to some bit of power, because look, Democrats got to get their act together. This January 6th commission, this should have been already in the works. This should have happened, as I said back on the 20th. I said, the 21st, they should have been proposing this. We should have been having hearings every day to expose what happened on that day, so that the Republicans didn't have the chance to try and reinvent, to rewrite the history of that day. Again, drug their feet too long. as Rick Wilson said, and as I've said 1,000 times, if you got the power, you got to use it, or you're going to lose it. And like I've said, working class voters, white working class voters want somebody who's going to get in there and throw a punch, even if you're throwing the wrong punch, even if you're on the wrong side of it. We want somebody who's going to stand up and fight for us. And Democrats need to learn that lesson. You got to fight the fight, even if you lose. So gonna be interesting to see in the coming days, weeks and months where this goes. Love to hear your thoughts, though. Do you have a favorite in the Senate race here in Pennsylvania or the gubernatorial race? Love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, download the podcast there at the website. Get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people